Welcome to my 244th video on my work with OO gauge. Following on from my previous videos about the Clockwork saddle tank and diesel shunter, this video will feature another Clockwork locomotive. And this one is surely the most interesting, something of a unicorn in the world of OO gauge model railway history. Although it was sold by Triang, unlike all other Triang railway models, it doesn't have a plastic body. The body of this model is die-cast. Indeed, the only plastic the model features at all is in the way of plastic wheels fitted by Triang to the rear pony truck. The reason this model is so odd is that it wasn't created by any of the streams we've come to expect in OO gauge modelling. Not Meccano Hornby, not Rovex Triang, not Trix, and not any of the continental manufacturers. Although casual modellers may not be familiar with the name Rovex, those with serious interest in the history of railway modelling in the UK will be familiar with the story. Rovex was a British company mainly producing moulded plastic models such as cars. In 1950, Marks and Spencer, the large department store company, asked Rovex to produce a model train set for the Christmas market. They did so and produced the set seen here. This set featured a model of an LMS Princess Royal class locomotive, in BR livery, together with coaches. The bodies of the rolling stock were made of moulded cellulose acetate plastic. The set was OO gauge running on 12 volts DC. Also, significantly, it sold for around half the price of the cheapest other train set available at the time. But Rovex was still a company in financial difficulties, and in 1951 they were acquired by the Lyons brothers, owners of the Triang toy brand. And that essentially was the birth of Triang Model Railways, officially launched in 1952, with slightly modified versions of the Rovex models. Triang Railways, of course, evolved, eventually producing a wide variety of models, essentially following on from the Rovex basis of moulded plastic bodies, although fairly early on they switched from cellulose acetate to polystyrene, as the cellulose acetate proved very prone to warping. And in 1964, the Lyons brothers took over the failing Meccano company, joining the Hornby brand with Triang, initially as Triang Hornby and then as the Hornby brand that we know today. But that story admits another little wrinkle which is less widely familiar, not least because it really didn't amount to much more than a footnote in the longer view. Around the same time in 1950 that Rovex were coming up with their train set for Marks and Spencer, another British company, Pyramid Toys, created a train set which they sold under the brand name Trackmaster, not to be confused with the modern children's toys with plastic track that use that name. And here is a picture of the Trackmaster train set, quite handsomely packaged. As seen here, the set featured an 062 tank locomotive, a number of wagons, and track to make an oval. Note the marked warping of the roofs on the wagons on the left. That's what tends to happen to cellulose acetate over time. You might note a couple of unusual things about this OO gauge train set. The track appears to be cast as a single piece, the rails don't look metallic, and there's no provision for electric power supply and control, because the Loco in this set was operated by Clockwork. The Trackmaster Clockwork Loco was also sold as a separately boxed item, as seen here, together with its winding key. The Trackmaster locomotive was entirely made of metal with no plastic used at all. The body was die-cast. The winding key, seen at right here, didn't feature a square hole in its end as winding keys usually do. Rather, the key had a solid square end which fitted into a square hole in the mechanism. Here are two slightly different versions of the Trackmaster Loco. The one at the top is the earliest version with spoked wheels on the pony truck. Shortly, Pyramid switched to fitting solid wheels. The Trackmaster models used their own form of coupling different from both Hornby and Triang. Pyramid did also offer the wagons for sale separately, as seen here. In fact, just out of curiosity, I've actually bought the boxed Trackmaster wagon seen here on eBay UK, but only just, so it will take a while to reach me here in Canada, if it does. In December 1951, just after they had bought Rovex and before the actual launch of Triangle Model Railways, the Lyons brothers bought out Pyramid Toys and acquired all of the tooling and rights for the Trackmaster models. I'm not really clear why the Lyons brothers made this purchase. Did Pyramid have manufacturing facilities, machinery, etc., useful in the launch of Triangle Model Railways? I suppose the wagon models may have been useful, as Rovex had only made a passenger set. However, the Trackmaster Clockwork Loco was rather an odd fit for Triang. Nevertheless, they did take it into their range, and they continued to manufacture it for a good many years, even setting up separate manufacturing in New Zealand for sales in that part of the world. This is a picture of a Triang version of the Loco model. Not a great many changes have been made from the Trackmaster version. The most obvious difference is the switch to Triang couplings, the Mark IIA version on this model. Also, Triang fitted both rear and front couplings. The Trackmaster version had no front coupling. This particular model appears to have spoked metal wheels on the pony truck. Fairly early on, Triang switched to using plastic wheels on the pony truck. I'm pretty sure that the coal on this model is a custom addition that has been done at some point. Here's a view from the bottom showing the clockwork mechanism, or at least some of it. And here are the instructions for the Triang version. Actually, there does appear to be a picture including coal here, so maybe Triang did include that at some point, but not on the one I bought. Here, finally, is the actual model that I bought myself. As you can see, mine didn't come with any realistic coal, just a rather vague texturing on the top of the bunker. Here's the view from the other side. The paintwork was a little chipped, and one of the front steps was missing. The pony truck on my model was fitted with unspoked plastic wheels. Here's a close-up of the winding hole. As you may see, there's no shaft to be gripped, but rather a square hole into which the winding key must be fitted. I didn't get a key with my purchase, so I had to find something that would fit into this hole in order to wind my model. This model only features one control lever, unlike the other Triang Clockwork models that I have, which have two levers, one for start-stop and one for reversing. My model also came missing its back coupling. I was aware of this from the eBay listing. Indeed, I almost didn't buy the model because of this, but then I figured that I probably ought to be able to fix this, and anyway, the model was hardly likely to spend a lot of time actually pulling trains. I'll get back to this issue later in this video. The only thing that I could find that would make a good fit into the winding hole was this screwdriver bit. I used that to wind the model's spring. It didn't really seem to want to run at first, although it was listed on eBay as fully functional. Unfortunately, well, it works a bit. Well, that's actually the best I've got it to work. Yeah, it's actually working now. I was expecting to make a video illustrating how it didn't work, but it actually is working now. I could only get it to work by sort of pushing the wheels round before like that, but then it's still kind of sticking. See, that's how it was running before. Would run a bit and stick, and then... So I don't know. I give it a good oiling, it'll probably work better. Next, I wanted to get the chassis out of the body, so that I could try to lubricate the clockwork and get it working a bit better. There were two screws on the top of the body. I undid those two screws and removed them. With those screws removed, I was able to lift the body off the chassis. I was rather alarmed to find that the control lever stayed with the body, apparently not attached to the mechanism at all. Here's the control lever inside the body, basically just a flat metal bar with a sloped end, and no sign of any way of attaching it to anything. There was a decal with the Triang brand logo inside the body. It appeared that the control rod was just supposed to slide down between the side of the chassis and the body. When pushed all the way in, the front of the bar would press on the front wheel, stopping the Loco from running, but this didn't actually seem to work very well. There were castings on the side of the chassis to guide the rod. The rod went in like this, through the slot in one casting, and then underneath the cast lug at the end, so pushing it down onto the wheel. When assembled, the body would stop the bar from coming out sideways, but as I say, it didn't really do much of a job of stopping the Loco running when the spring was wound. I did my best to oil all of the pivot points of the Clockwork mechanism and the axles and rods. I put some grease onto the gears and ran it in. This Clockwork mechanism appeared considerably more crude and simple than the mechanism in my later plastic-bodied Triang Clockwork models. The large gears appeared to be cast rather than machined, and there were no controls actually built into the Clockwork itself at all. It could only be prevented from running when wound by stopping the wheels from turning, and there was no provision for reversing, so the Loco could only be run forwards, which was presumably why Pyramid didn't bother to fit a front coupling. I'm not entirely sure why Triang did. Here is the front coupling, a standard Triang Mark IIA coupling, fitted into a slot in the cast chassis. And here is the slot in the rear pony truck where the rear coupling would have been fitted. I'm not exactly clear how that coupling would have been held in place, but not all that well apparently, since it had departed at some point. I had managed to procure these items specifically hoping that they would help me fix this Loco model. There are a couple of Triang chassis here, but for some reason someone had deliberately cut the hooks off from their couplings. The only complete coupling was on a pony truck. I couldn't simply fit that pony truck to my Loco model, as it was much longer than the truck on my model. And detaching the couplings looked to be quite a problem. One of the chassis and the pony truck appeared to have the body of the coupling cast right into their main frame. Only the chassis at front showed any sign of the coupling body being fitted as a separate item. I set about trying to remove one of the couplings from that chassis. I used a cutting disc in a rotary tool to cut through the frame of the chassis, which was surprisingly hard. It wasn't soft white metal, but something quite hard. I cut right through the chassis member in the end. Even with the member cut through like that, it showed no sign of wanting to come away from the coupling body. I used pliers to try to pull off the end of the chassis member. It really didn't want to come off. I did eventually manage to pull off the end of the chassis member, and the coupling came with it. You can see why it didn't want to come off. There was a steel rod going right through a hole in the coupling body and fitting inside the chassis member on each side. I could only assume that the chassis was actually cast around the coupling and its attachment rod. With the coupling now detached from the chassis, I was able to pull out the bent steel rod, finally getting a separated coupling, albeit with no hook since someone had cut it off. I held the coupling body in large pliers and levered out the rivet holding in the hook and loop. I was able to pull out that rivet, so freeing the parts. And here are the parts of that coupling separated: the body at bottom, the rivet at top, the loop at left, and the hook part in the middle, but as noted with its actual hook cut off. So now I wanted a hook, and the only source I had for this was the one on the extra pony truck. I couldn't get hold of the rivet on that coupling to pull it out, so I drilled it out, allowing me to remove the hook and loop parts. Then I fitted those hook and loop parts into the coupling body that I'd removed from the wagon chassis, reinserting the original rivet to hold the parts in place. I fitted my newly assembled coupling to the pony truck of the Clockwork Loco, using CA glue to hold it in place. It did fit very neatly into the truck frame, so now I actually had a rear coupling on my Loco model. This is a Mark IIB with the curved skid on the bottom of the hook bar. I refitted the body to the Loco. I touched up the chip paintwork a bit with a black marker. This didn't really work all that well. It looked okay initially, but it rubbed off. The markings on my model weren't in great shape, but I wasn't concerned about that, as I don't run British Railways, and I was intending to remove those markings. Here are the markings on the other winding side of the model. I wasn't really sure whether the markings were decals or painted on. Pyramid apparently started with decals and then switched to paint. I'm not clear what Triang did, but I started by trying microset on the markings. Microset will soften decals, allowing them to be removed so long as they're not covered by an overcoat. And microset won't really have any effect on paint, so there should be no harm in trying it. It turned out that these markings did soften and come off when scraped with a fingernail, so presumably they were decals. I was able to remove the markings, but a sort of shadow remained where they had been. Here's the other side after removal of the markings. As you may see, the letters and numbers were still visible as a sort of shadow. Given that, I decided that I'd better paint over where the old markings had been before trying to apply new markings. I just brush painted the sides with some Model Master semi-gloss black enamel, not made anymore, unfortunately. I'm always a bit nervous about brush painting, as brush marks wouldn't look good. But the enamel went on fairly smoothly in this case. I balanced the model on some rubber blocks whilst the paint dried, as otherwise I was afraid that it would tend to run down and become uneven. After the paint dried, the finish wasn't totally smooth, but it wasn't too bad. I didn't paint the whole body, just the sides and a bit of touching up where the edges were chipped. Next, I needed to decide how I was going to apply new markings, and that was not entirely straightforward. Given that I liked to model LMS operations before the Second World War, my thoughts were directed to how this Loco might be passed as something operated by the LMS in that period. The Trackmaster Loco appears to have been based on the N2 class, originally developed by the Great Northern Railway and operated after amalgamation by the LNER. Now, the Hornby 0062 tank model was also based on the N2 class, and that 00 model was sold in pretty much every possible livery, including LMS, but not the pre-grouping GNR. However, the LMS never operated engines of the N2 class, and if one looks for an LMS class similar to the N2, it isn't easy to identify such a class. The best-known 062 tank class operated by the LMS would be the LNWR Webb coal tanks and related classes. A quite nice ready-to-run model of a Webb coal tank in 00 gauge was released by Bachmann, and I have a couple of those. Here is a picture of a Webb coal tank in LMS operation. It does look quite similar to the N2, but a major and obvious difference is that the Webb tank was made to a considerably higher loading gauge, and so its chimney and dome are much taller than those of the N2, a difference that's very clear even on a casual glance. So I cast around for an 062 tank class operated by the LMS, more similar in appearance to the N2. It appears that the next most numerous class of 062 tank engines operated by the LMS was the Glasgow and South Western Railway Class 45, somewhat confusingly also known as the GSWR Class 1, after the GSWR renumbered its classes. That class was developed for the GSWR coal traffic, but proved less than ideal for those trains given its limited power and restricted coal and water capacity limiting its range. After amalgamation, the LMS replaced the Class 45 locos with something more suitable for the Scottish coal traffic, and the Class 45 engines were distributed around the LMS network, performing shunting and short-range freight work. The 45s continued in that role throughout the 1930s, although during the war they were relocated back to Scotland. Still, I like to model LMS operations in the 1930s, especially in the Midlands, and several of the 45s were allocated to Midland sheds during the 1930s. But I found it difficult to locate any decent illustration of this class. I finally found this picture of a Class 45 in its original GSWR livery. It does appear more similar to the N2 than the webbed coal tank, although one clear difference is that the safety valves are encased in a bonnet in somewhat Great Western style. I also found pictures online of this O-gauge kit-built model of a Class 45 in LMS livery. I have no way of knowing what the builder of this model based the markings on. Those were the only pictures I was able to find of a Class 45 for quite a while, but doing a thorough search through my own library, I finally managed to find this photo of a Class 45 in LMS service in the 1930s. So now I had a firm basis for marking a Loco as a Class 45. The LMS numbered the Class 45s in the 16,000 range, initially around 16,400, and then renumbering them around 16,900 in 1926. This Loco appears to be finished in a style employed mainly at Horwich and St Rollox to use up 18-inch numbers. It is in unlined black. With that research done, I went ahead with remarking my model. I put a piece of masking tape on the side to provide a baseline. I actually tried to use some recently acquired Fox waterslide transfers at first, but I found those to be so delicate that it was almost impossible to position them properly without damaging them. If I'm ever to succeed in using those, it will certainly require more practice. For now, I went back to HMRS press-fix transfers, of which I have something of a supply, especially in this style. I put appropriately sized LMS letters on the side of the cab. And then I applied digits for the number to the side of the tank, doing my best to keep them level and evenly spaced. Here's the first side after removal of the backing tissue. I made pencil marks on the tape under each letter and digit to help in getting the decals on the other side spaced the same. I applied the tape to the other side of the model, running in the opposite direction, obviously, which was why I had to run the pencil marks right across the tape. I put the LMS letters onto the cab side, positioned on my pencil marks. And then I applied the numbering digits to the side of the tank, also based on my pencil marks. Here's the model remarked. It seemed okay to have the numbers above the winding hole. And here's the other side without the winding hole. Not exactly correct for a GSWR Class 45, but not too obviously far off. I got the model onto my 003 rail tracks to attempt some running, which proved rather less than straightforward, as you will see. Okay, I want to try and show this Triang X Trackmaster Clockwork Loco running, but it's a bit of a devil to do because, quite honestly, the brake doesn't work. I've got the brake pushed in here, there, and that should be stopping it running, but it really isn't. It just doesn't seem to work, the brake. Oh, well, it works when it wants to, and doesn't work. Well, it works when you don't want it to and won't work when you want it to. This is the problem. I don't know. Oh, I don't know. It's just impossible, and then I can't get hold of the thing. Nope. See, now I can't for the life of me manage to pull that brake out. Okay, is it going to work now? No. And it's still not working. It was working, now it isn't. It's very awkward. It is wound. It's wound, but it doesn't want to work now. And I don't have enough hands to do this, you see. I don't know. Oh, flaming heck. No, I can't get it to run. Now I got the... Nope. I just cannot get the damn thing to run now. It was running, but now I can't get it to run. It just seems to be impossible to get this thing to run on camera. Oh, there it goes, vaguely. Oh, and then it stops again. I've had it running better off camera, but it just doesn't seem to want to run now. I don't know why not. I'm pretty sure it's fully wound. It's just, and it's been oiled and greased and whatever, and it just doesn't want to run now. It was running, I had it running fairly decently, but now it just doesn't seem to want to run. Well, I don't know. I'll try and wind it some more, see if that does any good. It doesn't help that I have to wind it with a screwdriver, so I can't really tell how much I'm winding it, because that's much more awkward than winding it with a key. But the only thing I've got to wind this is a screwdriver. Well, there you go. It has run, for what it's worth. Oh, and like everything else, why is it all these Clockwork things always want to stop in the tunnel? That's always their preferred place to stop, because that's the one place I can't photograph them. One more try. It is an absolute bugger trying to wind and rail this thing, because the brake really doesn't... Oh, it derailed itself there. It came off there going round the corner to the point. Okay, one more try going the other way, maybe. Famous last words. Oh, it's very hard to manipulate this and manipulate the camera. You know, manage to wind this and then pick the camera up and get this going. He's going to make his way back and hide in the tunnel as usual. Oh, he actually got through the tunnel. Well, that's about the most success I've had running this. Oh, I'm sorry, my hand's shaking. I'm a bit tired now and not that well. But there you go, it did sort of run. Is there any chance I can get this thing to pull a train? Probably not much, really. But we can try. I actually managed to rail the train, at least. After I went to all that trouble to put the back coupling on, it would be nice to at least persuade it to run a train a bit. Well, I think that's all I'm going to get out of it, isn't it? I really don't think I'm going to get any more out of this engine than that. But still, an interesting exercise, even if it doesn't produce a great runner.